Welcome to the ninth week of our online learning. My beloved earth graders, how are you? How was your weekend? Hope you've been studying. Hope you've been staying safe. I'm very happy to be with you once again. This week we shall be talking about intervals 2, perfect, augmented, and diminished interval. Remember last week we talked about interval 1, the major and the minor. This week we shall be discussing interval 2, perfect, augmented, and diminished. Now, at the end of this lesson, you are expected to know, you should be able to identify the four types of perfect intervals. You should be able to describe augmented, perfect, and diminished intervals. You should be able to differentiate between augmented, perfect, and diminished intervals. And finally, you should be able to illustrate these intervals on a staff. Now, let me go through that again. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the four types of perfect intervals, describe augmented, perfect, and diminished intervals, differentiate between augmented, perfect, and diminished intervals, and finally illustrate these intervals on the staff. Perfect intervals. Perfect intervals. Now, there are four types of perfect intervals. These include the perfect unism, the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, and the perfect octave. Now, the perfect intervals are four types. The first is the perfect unism, the second is the perfect fourth, the third is the perfect fifth, and finally, the perfect octave. We're going to explain them one after the other. Now, types of intervals, we say the perfect unism is one. Now, the perfect unism is also called prime interval. Prime simply means first. First. Prime interval. The notes of a unism are at one place, either on the line or in a space on the staff. That's to say, if the first note is on C, the middle C, the second one is going to be on middle C. A perfect unism has both notes on the same line. It tells us that the notes of a unism are at one place. That's if it's on the middle C, both of them will be on middle C. There won't be any interval, there won't be any distance between them. If it's on the space, let's say F space, both notes are going to be on F space. Don't worry, the graphic illustration is on the next slide. So a perfect unism is also called the prime interval. The notes of the unism are at one place, either on the line or in a space on the staff. Now the next we shall be looking into is the perfect fourth. A perfect fourth contains five semitones. In a perfect fourth, four-letter names are involved. For example, from C to F. Remember, C, D, E, F. 4. So that means it is a fourth. Then from F, A, F, G, A, B. 4. That makes it a fourth. So four letters must be involved in a fourth, and the semitones must be 5. If it's not 5, it is not a perfect octave or a perfect fourth. Sorry, if it's not 5 semitones, then it's not a perfect fourth. So remember, four letters might be involved, and it must have 5 semitones. Now the third one is the perfect fifth. The perfect fifth. Now, a perfect fifth involves 5 letters 5-letter names and contains 7 semitones. So it is C, D, E, F, G. For example, C, D, E, F, G. That's 5-letter names. Then D, E, F, G, A. 5. You can see it. A, B, C, D, E. 5. So it must have 5-letter names, and the semitones that are involved within this 5-letter name must be 7. So we've talked about the perfect unism, the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, and the final one is the perfect octave. Perfect octave. Now, a perfect octave involves 8-letter names. For example, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And it must have 12 semitones. 12 semitones. So a perfect octave involves 8-letter names and contains 12 semitones. All 8 are perfect. That's all the letters, whether you want to start it from A to A, B to B, C to C, all of them, they are perfect octaves. I hope we understand this. We have 4 types of perfect intervals. We have the perfect unism, we have the perfect fourth, we have the perfect fifth, and we have the perfect octave. Perfect octave. Okay, let's look at the graphical illustration. Example of perfect intervals. Now, if you look at this clef, you're going to find out that the first one is a perfect unism. Now the first note is on C, while the second one is on G. So if you count from C to G, it's going to give you 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. C, D, E, F, G. It's 5. That's why it's called the perfect unism. I remember, for it to be perfect unism, it has to have 7 semitones within. 7 semitones within the um, distance between the C to the G. Now, after perfect unism, we have the perfect fourth. Remember, the perfect fourth, it must be made up of 4 letters. That's, it must be from a letter to its fourth movement. So the first note here is on G, and the second one is on C. So count it. G, A, B, C is 4. G, A, B, C is 4. So G, 1, A, 2, B, 3, C, 4. So it is called the perfect fourth because from the first letter to the second, from the first note to the second note is a fourth distance, and the semitone between them is 5. Remember, a perfect fourth has 5 semitones, while a perfect fifth has 7 semitones. Now remember, we were told that a perfect unism, both notes are placed on the same line. So this is middle C. So you see the both notes are in the middle C. There is no space between them. So it is a perfect octave. Sorry, a perfect unism. And after a perfect unism, we have a perfect, sorry, after a perfect unism, we have a perfect octave. A perfect octave. Now, a perfect octave is from any note to the octave of that note. For example, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now we're told that it has 12 semitones. It has 12 semitones from C to C, from A to A, from G to G. Okay, so this is what a perfect interval look like. We have the perfect fifth, we have the perfect fourth, we have the perfect unism, and finally we have the perfect octave. Augmented diminished interval. Augmented and diminished interval. Now, An augmented interval is larger than a major and a perfect interval by a semitone. An augmented interval is larger than a major and a perfect interval by a semitone. Thus, only major and perfect interval can be augmented. Example, C to D sharp, C to F sharp. Now, we have already said that for a perfect fourth, it has to be made up of four letters. That means, for example, from A, B, C, D, from A to D, and it should have five semitones. Now, if it has more than five semitones, it has maybe six semitones, it is known as augmented. An augmented interval means that something has added to the number of semitones that it should have. For example, we've made that of a perfect fourth. Perfect fourth is supposed to have four letters and five semitones. But if it's having four letters and six semitones, we say that it is an augmented fourth. Hope we understand that. Now, for a major, if a major is supposed to have, for example, for example, a major second is supposed to have two semitones. Now, if it has three semitones, you call it an augmented second. I hope we understand that. Now, most things that cause an interval to have augments is sharps. So when you see a sharp, it shows you that that interval could be an augmented interval. Okay, then after that, we're going to be looking into diminished interval. Diminished, just from the name, it tells you that something has gone out. Diminished, something has reduced. Now, a diminished interval is a semitone less or lesser than a minor and perfect interval. Diminished intervals occur when a perfect or minor interval is decreased by a semitone. So, only minor and perfect intervals can be diminished. So, for example, a perfect fourth that is supposed to be five semitones, if it's having four semitones, we call it a diminished fourth. Now, a minor that is supposed to have one, for example, a second, is a minor second means that it has lost one. A minor second means that it has lost two semitone. Now, if it's lost semitones further, it is called a diminished second. Remember, they say a diminished interval is a semitone less than a minor and a perfect interval. So when we find out that our perfect intervals are more in semitones, we call them augmented. And when we find out that they are lesser in semitones, we call them diminished. Remember, a perfect can be diminished, a minor can be diminished, and a perfect can be augmented. Now let's look at the graphical illustration of that. Now this is a graphical illustration of an augmented and a diminished. An augmented and a diminished. The time signature on this is 8 4. So we have 8 crochets in a bar. We have 8 crochets in a bar. Okay. So you see the first one is an augmented prime. An augmented prime. You see the sharp raising it. And the second one is a diminished second. Remember, a second is supposed to have two semitones. But when it's having one, it is called a minor. When it's not having, it is called a diminished. We have an augmented third. We know an augmented third is supposed to have four semitones. Four semitones. Now, then we have a diminished sixth. A diminished sixth. We have an augmented seven a diminished octave. Remember, an octave is supposed to have 12 semitones, but it's diminished because it has lost semitone. Then augmented fourth. Then finally, we have a diminished fifth. Now, I would want you to take your biro and pencil, your biro and paper, sorry. Then go check the interval between these notes, the interval between the first note and the second note, and you're going to find out why it is a fourth or it is a fifth or it's a second, and then you can calculate the number of semitones and see how it actually went. Finally, we have a table. We have a table that is going to direct you on the number of semitones, the types of interval, and the number of semitones. Now, a perfect tunism has 0 semitones. A perfect fourth has 5 semitones. A perfect fifth has 7 semitones. A perfect octave has 12 semitones. An augmented second has 3 semitones. An augmented fourth has 6 semitones. An augmented fifth has 8 semitones. An augmented sixth has 10 semitones. A diminished third has 2 semitones. A diminished fourth has 4 semitones. A diminished fifth has 6 semitones. And finally, a diminished seventh has 9 semitones. Okay, so with this, we've come to the end of our classes for today. Please, any questions should be directed to me. Please don't fail to do that. Anyway, you're having problem, please call on my attention and I'll be there for you. Thank you. Continue to have a blessed day and remember, stay safe.